Welcome to A Book with Bubble Tea. With your host, Mira He. Here, I share takeaways from East Asian books on parenting, startups, and self-growth. Seeking insights beyond the typical English shelf? Want to be a better parent and achieve more in life? You're in the right place. Grab your bubble tea and let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the new episode of A Book with Bubble Tea. And today we have another great book that I want to introduce to you guys, which is called Struggling to Raise Children, Globalization, Parental Anxieties, and Unequal Childhood. It's by the same author that we have talked about before, the parental anxieties. It's by this author, Peja Lan. And this book that we're going to talk about today, she has turned her eyes away from simply Taiwanese parents, but she wanted to focus on those parents who migrated to the United States and see whether they are less anxious or they are just as anxious as their counterpart in Asia. So Pei Jianlan, she is a distinguished sociology professor at National Taiwan University. She has a PhD in sociology from Northwestern University in the US, and her primary research focus are in parental studies, gender, migrant women. And this book we're going to talk about today, like I said, we're going to examine parental anxieties in a comparison, in a comparative studies. Plus, also how middle class versus working class in urban and rural area differ in these two places. But today, instead of hearing me monologuing as usual about the book, I have a special guest. He is one of my best friends, and he's my constant partner, and we studied together in Norway. I think it was back in 2005,
Yeah, it was.
2006, around that time. And I have to invite him to the show today because there is no better person to discuss about this subject than him. So his name is Steiner. He is a lecturer at a university, and he teaches human rights, political science, sociology, anthropology, English history, basically like all the social sciences subjects. And since he's a teacher and lecturer, he has firsthand experiences of how parents feel like in Norway. So we are not just going to look at parents in Taiwan and the US, but we are bringing the Norwegian perspective into the show as well. Because like when we think about, the paradise of the world, I think Nordic countries definitely rank very high up on the list. So, as Asian, we romanticize everything Western. So where else will be a better case to look into further when it comes to parental anxiety? So let's welcome Steiner to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So Steiner,
Yeah.
as you read about this book,
Mhm.
or I think my microphone is a bit funny, but as you read about this book, what were the main thing that came into your mind when you were reading about it?
Well, first of all, I think parenting is hard. When I
Tell
read
me.
through when I read through these anxieties and these challenges, my first thought was I got stressed just by reading about it. The notion of the parents who so badly want to be there for their children, to give them that upper hand in this world of competition that is constantly running,
Right.
sounds exhausting in a way. And for me as a Scandinavian, it's such a different take on the world because we don't see the world through that lens of competition necessarily.
Mm.
To constantly consider the future as a race that you need to strategically position your children in order to run for the top spots.
Mm.
And to sort of get an insight into that way of thinking was really interesting for me because it's so far away from my own, how should I say, my own perceived view of the world in a way. So for me, it was a very, very different take.
Just to give an example to everybody. So
Yeah.
when I asked Steiner and said, "Hey, which university are you currently working at?" And then he sent me this list, and I immediately asked him, "What's the ranking of this
Yeah.
university?" And Steiner thought, "This is too Asian."
Yeah, for me, ranking makes okay, but that's interesting, right? Because I am who I am as a teacher. I have the background I have. I teach the subjects I teach, and I do that on the merits of my own style. It's my own, this is the skill I have owned.
Hmm.
And then the question is, does it matter where I teach and how it's ranked? Does that change anything about me as a person? No. It only changes in some way my weight, perhaps in terms of sort of power as but for me personally it doesn't change anything.
Right.
So
Let's
when you asked me, I was like, but why does that matter?
All right, let's
Cool is
park
cool.
that. Let's park that sorry, I think my mic is so let's park that Norwegian perspective aside for now.
Yep.
Let's
Yep.
go back to the book.
Yep.
So I think the general theme of the book,
Mm,
like what you have talked about, is anxieties,
yeah.
regardless of where you are. Like
Yeah.
whether you are parents remaining in Taiwan or
Mm,
China or parents that you have successfully migrated to the United States already.
mm,
Like regardless where you're from, you are just anxious. And
yeah.
um, and one thing definitely stood out to me is for those parents in Taiwan, they feel they need to migrate to the US to give
Mm,
their kids a better future because they worry about global competition. They
mm,
worry about, you know, their children are not westernized enough in order to continue to have those well-beings of life in the
mm,
future. So that's basically the motive for them to migrate to the US. But once they are there,
mm.
one thing that stood out is like they feel being American, white American, just means mediocrity. Like
Yeah.
means that you are being a mediocre person. So then they start worrying about, right, the competition from their hometown.
Mm, mm,
Like, what about, those great bright kids from China, from
mm,
Taiwan, from East Asia? Are my kids competitive enough, like
mm,
against them, the
mm.
future? So apparently, like being white alone is no longer good enough. In fact, like to a lot of the second generation of parents in the US, like being white actually means just mediocre, just being good
Yep.
enough, like
Mm.
means that you are losing the competitiveness in the world. What do you think about this, Steiner?
Well, again, for me, it's not surprising in a way because when you move away from somewhere and you try to you try to position yourself in a new country, you end up being in a borderland.
Hmm.
That always happens because you are from somewhere, you take some of that with you, and then you settle somewhere else.
Hmm.
And there is a new culture, a new way of doing things. And as you said, they romanticize the Western educational system, right?
Mm.
But what did they really romanticize?
I think a lot of them, they feel because of their own upbringing, like when they
Hmm.
were being brought up, right? They were
Hmm.
under this cramped style of education. Like
Yep.
you really have to study very hard. You have to
Hmm.
memorize everything. And
Yep.
then the exam, you have to take national examinations to go
Hmm.
into a good senior high school, to go into good university. And only very few people can
Hmm.
actually enter those academic institutions to continue to study further. So the
Yep.
gate of entrance was already very narrow.
Hmm.
Plus, I think Asia being so densely
Hmm.
populated means you're constantly competing with other people, right, in order to
Yep.
get the best resources because the resources is so scarce. So I
Hmm.
think that mindset of competition is definitely there. Therefore, when a lot of parents, when they grew up in
Hmm.
Taiwan or China, they look back to their childhood it's like, man, I have such a hard time like studying.
Yep.
I heard kids in the US, they got home at 2 p.m., 3 p.m., and kids just play around the whole
Yep.
day. And then they develop their whole personality. They're more critical with their thinking
Hmm.
and they can explain themselves better. that's something we need in the international world. So,
Yeah. And then you have this idea that this happens organically with every single child. And you think that if you just get there, then that's going to happen. But here's the thing, most people are average. That's just the way the
mm,
world works. And you get there and you realize it comes with a price, this
mm-hmm,
freedom.
mm-hmm,
And that if you go from a very competitive thinking ahead to a system that is still competitive, mind you. The
mm-hmm,
American system is very competitive compared to Europe, for example.
mm-hmm,
But not everyone is in the race.
mm-hmm.
And then you start thinking, oh, um, but I know what's happening back home because you have that perspective. You can feel
Right,
the competition, right?
right.
And when that happens and you get worried or you get anxious, what
Mm-hmm,
is the typical thing we turn to
mm-hmm.
as a human being? What's the typical thing you turn to?
What you know,
What you
right?
know.
Yeah.
And you realize, okay, it was backbreaking work, but it got me ahead. Look at where I am.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
think that is the dilemma a lot
Yeah.
of the middle class parents seem to be trapped in, according
Mm.
to the book, right? So basically, the middle class parents, they feel very insecure because they get to where they are now
Yeah.
through competition, through
Yeah.
hard working, through studying hard.
Mhm.
However, they desire an even brighter future for their kids. So they started to look at what's lacking in their
Mm.
upbringing, right? I didn't have a childhood. I wasn't happy because I was made to study all the time. When I went to the US to study, I
Mhm.
realized I wasn't able to articulate my thinking as well as my counterparts,
Mhm.
in my college or in my uni. Therefore, to my conclusion, the
Yeah.
only way that I can have a brighter future, secure a brighter future for my kids is they
Mhm.
basically have to have what I didn't have, a happy childhood.
Yeah.
But I also don't want them to fall behind the
Mhm.
academic ladder because that's how I managed to secure my position now. So
Yeah.
I think it's just means like the bar of competition is even higher. You
Yeah.
want your kids to be happy, but then you also want them to be having academic excellence.
Yeah. So you're trying to do two things that not necessarily are easily done at the same time.
Yeah. And
And
then
I think
yeah, sorry,
to
go ahead.
let go of the reins, I think that
Mhm.
is that the biggest takeaway I had from this book is how hard it is for parents now to let go of the reins. They need to control.
Mm,
Like every,
mm,
I remember they were talking about garden schools. Remember that section after
okay.
the Steiner method, right?
Okay.
And they go to garden schools where kids are supposed to be creative. They have different ways of
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
learning,
yeah.
like the
Mhm,
whole.
mm-mm.
But it didn't take long until they started to micromanage that as well.
Yes, it's
Like,
actually a very, very controlled kind
yeah,
of a freedom that the
yeah.
kids have.
So you got the paradox of trying to control natural growth, which
Mm,
means that is unnatural.
mm,
So, for example, oh no, they shouldn't be trading. They shouldn't have trading card games, or they shouldn't wear certain things to school because they are commercialized, or they should
right,
only wear certain types of clothing. And what one child wanted to play the piano, but she was told not to because that would inhibit her skills later,
right.
which is weird because then the child is expressing an interest in doing something it wants to do, and then it's curtailed because it doesn't fit the boxes of where you should be in your development.
I think it must be very bizarre to a Norwegian.
Not necessarily bizarre, but what I see is we see it in the work environment too, and in hiring and the whole idea of getting ahead, selling yourself, being able to articulate. Everything needs to be dynamic, everything needs to be fast, everyone needs to be in a stimulating environment. Every single
Yeah.
job application is the same. They're all
Mm-mm.
geared toward this, oh, high energy, high sort of pressure, high everything. This is the way to go. We need to sort of have the engines running.
Mm.
And we put that into the children as well.
There is recently a big news in Taiwan
Hmm.
about we call it cram school or after class institution, basically where kids go to learn different subjects after
Hmm.
school. So I think this is posted by an English institution. So
Hmm.
in their institution, there are two particularly outstanding students, and they're from the same family.
Yep.
So the institution posted a schedule of
Yep.
these siblings a routine, day-to-day routine. And then it sparked like national discussion because the
Mm,
kids started at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. Then they
mm,
will practice math for 1 hour. Then they will go to get ready. They will go to school. And then after they finish school, they will basically like have dinner in the car and then do their homework in the car. And then mom will drive them like to a piano class for
mm,
1 hour. And then afterwards to another math class for another hour, and then the kids sleep at about 11 p.m.
mm.
And so if you count the number of hours the kids sleep, it's 6 hours,
Yep.
5 to 6 hours. And we are talking about kids that are 10 years old, 11 years
Mm.
old. They're not even like 18 years old or 17
Nope.
years old. They are very, very young age. So
Mm,
obviously the institution posted this as
mm.
I don't know what they were thinking, but perhaps this is the formula of success for the kids. But it sparked a lot of the discussion in Taiwan because even Taiwanese people feel like this is a bit harsh, right? It's just like, is it like a child abuse, to be
Mm.
honest? Like to push your kids to study so hard from such a young age. But I think that level of competitiveness, actually, a huge part arise from parents' own insecurities.
Yep.
Like the parents, as much as we want to protect our kids' future,
Mm.
we are facing a very dynamic world. And then the author pointed that out as well, because we're in such an interconnected world these days.
Yep.
I think even parents feel insecure. We don't really know what the future will be like.
No.
Nowadays we're challenged by AI, right? So everybody thinking, is my job going to be replaced by AI? So I think in this fast changing world, there is this deep, deep insecurities amongst everybody.
Yep.
And to parents, because we want to safeguard our kids so much, it just further enhances this insecurities, and then we become like a headless chicken, in my opinion. It's like we just
Yep.
want them to be good at everything.
Everything. Yep.
Everything. So yeah. And then I think this is one of the main thing from
Mm.
the book as well, right? Like globalization. I think the
Yep.
author particularly points this out. So what
Mm.
what do you think?
I agree with that assessment there. And also, what I found really interesting was the lack of the voice from the children here.
Mm,
This is constantly parents and the structures around and the class system and being in between and so on. But it's the voice of the children here.
mm-hmm,
Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, it's them who are going to solve the problem.
right,
They are eventually going to grow up, they're going to be individuals, they're going to have their own set of skills and their own way of doing things.
mm,
And how much we want to cultivate and how much we want to sort of put them into situations, in the end, they are going to do the work. They are the ones who are going to figure it out because they are the ones who are going to be the player on the board.
mm,
And one worry, I've spoke to other teachers in Norway about this as well. When everything is organized like that institution did, that every single hour is set up in a timetable, you have a little time, you have to do this and that, you have to be this and there. What happens is you get a very high energy speed life where there's no break.
mm,
There's no time for reflection. Remember, when you're learning, it's not just cramming a lot of information into your mind. You have to use it for something. You have to be able to sort of diffuse it into your brain and let it become part more holistically of your set of skills, right?
mm-hmm,
But you're constantly being bombarded with new theme, 1 hour, next theme, this, next hour, this, constantly going from one to one to one to one to one. There's never a stop. And then there's bedtime, sleep, wake up, rinse and repeat. Um, Children don't organize anything for themselves anymore.
mm,
Everything is organized either by an institution or by parents. They get bored easily if they don't have they need stimulus all the time, right? They need
mm-hmm,
someone to tell them what to do next.
mm,
And what happens is, first of all, being bored is probably one of the more creative situations you can be in as a child. When you're bored, well, you have to figure out something to do.
mm-hmm,
And this is when I remember from the 90s when we were, kids at home, every mother was home. You came home from school, we all met in the street outside our houses. It's like, okay, what are we going to do? Because no one has organized anything. We were sent out and told, come back for dinner, just whatever. Now we had to figure out what to do. So we would invent games, we would invent rules. There was socialization. The elder kids sort of became teachers of the younger in terms of social skills.
Mm,
If someone didn't play by the rules, it was often the elder kids who sort of put them straight and
mm,
told them this is what the rules are. Or if the game became uneven, we would change the rules so that it became even. So everyone kind of felt that it was fair. Otherwise, there's no point of playing.
mm,
And then we just figured these games out. And I have tons of examples of just silly games we made. And it all started with a ball being thrown over a roof. And then, hey, what if we try to do this? What if we try to do that? And that just came out of boredom. We had nothing to do. And when you're bored and have nothing to do, you have to figure out something to do to entertain yourself. But we take that away now. Always stimulus, always something organized.
mm-hmm,
And we see it in socialization in the fact, like many kids when they come to school now, especially when they're young adults, like teenagers, they don't have that set of skills in terms of social skills because they never faced it. Parents always diffused everything. If there was a conflict, it was solved either by parents or by the institution, not by kids themselves. We kind of took that away.
mm-hmm.
And we can see that in behavior, and then they have to sort of learn it much later, and it's much harder when everyone is
So
sort of
you see that in Norway as well, like amongst like
yes, we
young
see that
kids
more in
that you
Norway too.
teach.
We see that now because everything is more organized. First of all, everyone goes to kindergarten now.
So we're not just only talking about Asian
No,
parents here, but even in Norway that you
even
can
in Norway
see
we see
like
this.
right.
We have a tendency to structure lives much more in formal settings, and
Mm-hmm.
the sort of the informal part has disappeared. And
Mm-hmm.
I hear teachers talk about this in lower in the earlier years as well, that they
Mm-hmm.
can really tell that kids come from kindergarten where they go to kindergarten early, and then they're in kindergarten institutionalized play
Mm-hmm.
for several years. Then they
Mm-hmm.
go into school, more institution.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is institutionalized from very early childhood.
Mm.
So it takes away some of those mechanisms that used to be there because now it's all under the wing of educated personnel, which is a good thing, obviously. But it loses something on the along the way, and some
Mm.
of that I've spoke to other teachers too, think that some of that autonomy and the social skills gets lost because everything is within these frameworks that adults have created for children, not children for children, because obviously they wouldn't.
Mm.
And that is a bit of a challenge. And I think you see it here too with in the book too, this need to control, this need to make sure that every single hour is being spent in a way that is useful.
Mm.
Yeah, we can't waste time. And then the children said the same thing. Oh, we can't waste time, which means that I'm doing this activity, but it's only for fun. Does it actually have any value then? No. Okay, this activity has to go. That's the first thought. It's like, oh, but this is just for fun. We can't just have fun. It has to be functional, right? We have to spend our time wisely.
Yeah. But if you look at East Asia, then it's
Mm.
not hard to realize like why we're doing this way. For example,
No.
like nowadays everybody know NVIDIA, everybody know TSMC, right? And they
Mhm.
like TSMC is the biggest and the most advanced company in when it comes to making semiconductor chips. But
Yeah.
you know, and we know like TSMC is trying to set up a factory in the US, but then it's just not happening. It's taking forever.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is a wide discussion of why TSMC worked in Taiwan, but why it's so difficult to make it work in US. And
Mm.
one of the conclusion that people draw is because Taiwanese people are very diligent, very hardworking. They basically like devote their entire life to the company. They work 24-hour relentlessly. They're always on call,
Mhm.
and then you get like PhD grads like being in factory like supervising the production line, which you will never be able to see that in the
Mm.
US. So
No.
it seems like for East Asia, and then if you look at Olympics games,
Yeah.
what games East Asian excel on, those are all the games that require high technical skills, like
Yep.
figure skating, diving. You
Mhm.
know, we're not, it's like, it seems like East Asian, we're
Gymnastics.
in gymnastics, we're not able to compete by our raw natural physiques build up because we're not fast enough, we are not strong enough, we are not tall enough. But everything that we do seems to be requiring very high technical skills, and that takes hours and hours and hours and relentless effort,
Yeah.
from the kids, from parents, from the entire society, even from the government, to hone down that
Mm.
required skills in order for us to have a place in
Yeah.
international society. And I
Mhm.
don't know whether this is like a natural curse or a natural blessing, but it
Mm.
seems like we are also kind of restricted by our natural resources. Like we don't have natural resources. So it
Mm.
seems like this is the way survival strategies that East Asians have managed to come up.
Mm.
Yeah. And and another group that we cannot forget from the book, and I think we
Mhm.
have talked quite a lot about the middle class,
Yep.
it's a working class. And I
Yep.
think they also face the same challenge, the same struggles like the middle class. But according to the book, a lot of those working class parents, after they migrated to the US, their own authority within the family also got challenged.
Yep.
They feel like they kind of lost, the parents feel they lost the position in the family,
Mhm.
that they just have to be submissive to their hosting society, hosting country, right?
Mhm.
However way they do, and then just let it be. I don't know, like in Norway, do you see like a differences between working class and a middle class family, and the kids that come out of different social class backgrounds?
It's kind of hard to say in a Norwegian setting because we
Mm.
are not a class system per se.
Right, right, right.
Like to have that, we go back a couple of decades, it would be quite clear. Like we used to be a
Mm-mm-mm.
very class-oriented society where you had a very strong labor class. The Labor Party was ruling the country for a very long time, uninterrupted, and you
Mm,
had this clear middle class and sort of the owning elites. But then eventually this eroded
mm,
into who is working class now and who is middle class now. It's kind of hard to tell. And then we had the public school that was for everyone. Like the
mm.
whole system was created in such a way that you were supposed to send your kids to the school that is closest to you
Right,
geographically,
right.
which means that when you have merged sort of families are living together in areas where you would have those who are classically labor class families and those who are middle class. They live in the same neighborhood, which means that they send their kids to the same school.
Right.
And sort of like school is school. You have your local school. That's where your kids are supposed to go, and everyone gets the same type of education until they make their choices later in life when they're older, and
Mhm.
therefore they sort of that sort of sort of smushes out that divide in a way.
Mm, mm.
And to have a national curriculum to make sure that all kids learn the same. I know
Mm.
this is very typical social democratic thinking, right? The same textbooks, the
Right,
same curriculum. Make sure that all schools teach the same. So it shouldn't matter where they go.
right.
School is school, right?
Yeah, and then we can, on that point, we cannot forget our political science teacher's comments, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Steiner tell us about it.
Which one of them? There are so many.
Right. Right. So, so when I was studying with Steiner, and we have this teacher from political science, the American teacher, I think he
Michael
studied
Alvarez.
he studied at Chicago University, and
Yep.
I think he came from the hood, right? So
Yep.
he's
Yep.
from a
Pretty gnarly
Spanish,
neighborhood.
is Spanish speaking community, and I think he once shared a story like once he was at school and then he heard like gun firing up in the
Yep.
hood, and then he
Yep.
was like reflecting back to where he is now of teaching
Mm.
teaching political science, and like growing up from the hood, basically your life was under threat like every single day. And then I think he once made a very interesting remark about the Norwegian students' performance. He said Norwegian students, all of them, they basically perform very well,
Yep.
but you don't see you don't see great geniuses come
No.
out of it. But then you also don't see students who are underperforming. They're
Mm.
all like kind of bunch in the middle.
Yep.
And which is a great thing, which means like the educational system definitely works. But when it comes to having those geniuses to really like push the world, go forward and invent something new, innovate something new. And then I think his comment is like he doesn't see that
No.
coming out from Norwegian educational system.
No, we do it more as a block, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. You will have a few very sharp minds, obviously, but they will work in tandem with a block of people who are fairly competent.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. As I said, you don't get the high flyers. You don't get the ones in sort of at the edge,
Mm.
but you have a big body of people who are quite competent and know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have very few that sort of fall off the system. There are some of those too, unfortunately, but that's where the welfare state comes in.
Right.
But I remember also, do you remember he told that they had to brick the windows at the school so that the gangs wouldn't start shooting at each
Yes.
other? Yeah. So from a very different background, where your life is always on the line and sort of you get into that kind of competition. But we are in the forefront on some things as a nation.
Mm-hmm.
We are really good at oil technology, really good
Mm-hmm.
at oil technology under the sea, how
Mm-hmm.
to build ships, how to innovate in that sense. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not being done by a person. It's
Mm-hmm.
being done by companies who
Mm.
employ a lot of brain power.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember someone had done a research paper on Norway and the brain power, and they said, well, Norwegians could have been in the forefront on a lot of different fields,
Mm-hmm.
but the oil industry is really capping the brain power. This is where they go. They go
Mm.
into engineering oil solutions or supply solutions or anything that is linked to offshore drilling and seamanship.
Mm.
And
It's like semiconductor in Taiwan.
exactly,
Right.
we have our thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is our industry that is really sort of capping the big minds. They
Mm.
are the ones who show up at the technical university in Trondheim and starts
Mm-hmm.
picking the brightest minds.
Yeah. Same here. I think
Yep,
Taiwan and Norway both have relatively small demographics. So we
yep.
don't have a huge population where you can diversify
No,
um, and advance in all of the industries. So you can only pick and choose where your strengths are, I think.
we are 5.5 million people now. Woohoo.
5.5 million?
Yeah, that's it. That's our
So
entire
few.
population.
Wow. We are almost like 5 times larger than you guys. No, like 4.5 times larger than you guys. We
Mhm.
have 24 million population,
Yeah,
but we have the lowest fertility rate so in the world.
that's a bit of a problem.
So in very soon, I think we'll be taken over by you guys soon. And yeah, and I think talking about, back to what you just said about, allowing kids to
Mhm.
basically have boredom, to come up with something organically by themselves. As a mom, I can see the value in that. However, to me, this is a high risk, high return kind of
Yep,
parenting style.
yep,
Because back to our favorite teacher, right? He grew up
yep,
in a gang.
yep.
He could pretty much become a gangster instead of a professor.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So as a mom, I would not want to take that risk at all. I
No.
not I would not want to risk any chance of him becoming a gangster. Even
And
if that means he can only be like a normal office person at a company, that is better than, running into the risk of becoming a gangster and start shooting people or drug dealer. That's
yep,
like the worst case scenarios I want to avoid. Even if I don't expect him to be a genius, I don't want him to be, like
yep. You don't
that
want him
kind.
to fall into the but then again, this is the typical paradigm of how we think, right? It's either this or that. It's like either the high end of the scale or the low end. Like
Right.
where there is a whole lot of what we say gray between black and white.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
we kind of tend to either focus on the top or the bottom.
Right.
And of course, but my example of obviously a shielded Norwegian childhood, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm,
I lived in the 90s as a child, late 80s, early 90s. And of course, Norway had a population of 4.2 million people.
mm-hmm,
Not that many gangs, drugs, all of these things were sort of alien things we heard about from Oslo, like,
mm-hmm.
oh, that goes on in Oslo, right? And of course, then it's easier to let go of the reins if there are not that many dangers around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is, just think about it, it's a neighborhood of typically some academics, some middle class, some working class families. All mothers are home because in this time of the world history, men did work and women were home with their
Mm-hmm.
kids, which
Mm-hmm.
meant that you had mothers in pretty much every house. There
Mm-hmm.
was always some adults around, right?
Mm-mm-mm.
And the kids could run around in this area on the playground or in the forest or climb the trees or whatever, but there would always be someone home. Maybe not your mother, but someone else's mother, right?
Huh. And then they
So
help
there is,
look after each
yes,
other's kids.
yes, so you get the kind of that community upbringing thing, the saying, you need a village to raise a child.
Right.
In a way, that is what happened.
Mm.
So it wasn't unusual to be scolded by someone else's mother if you messed
Mm.
up, right? Or
Mm.
if there was a playground showdown,
Mm.
some parent would show up and ask what's going on here, or
Mm.
or just someone peeking through a window. You would see an angry face in the window if someone was being too loud, and then you would go somewhere else, right? So you had that kind of security around you anyway,
Right.
which of course, would be very different from Chicago in the 80s.
Right.
So you have to appreciate kind of the structures around as well that you don't see as a child, right? Because for you, this is just reality. You're just larking around, having fun.
Mm.
And I
No, go ahead.
no,
I'm just thinking.
I was just going to say that, of course, that is a luxury
Mm.
that is very easy to overlook.
That's
And
true. I mean, I think the author also talked quite a few points about being privileged, and I
yeah,
think this is in the title, the
yeah,
privileged childhood. So,
mm,
a lot of the strategies that parents have adopted are
mm,
actually very, very class-based. And then you raise one privilege that Norwegian kids had back in
mm,
the 80s, which kids in Chicago might not be able to enjoy.
exactly.
And there are different privileges like the middle class family have. For
Mm,
example, private teachers, private
mm,
tutors. I think she talked about an example of a famous Chinese tiger mom, like the one
yeah,
who basically invented this concept, Amy Zhou,
yep.
about how she managed to get her kids to be so excellent at everything,
Mm,
right? And the author plainly said it's partially because your kids are from a very privileged
yeah.
background. So, and obviously working class families, they do not have that privilege. So a lot of the times that the family would just have to, go with the flow, essentially.